Most of everything else that we do in programming is flow control. Do we make a decision? Do we call a function and jump over to that function? Do we repeat something over and over? And in PHP, decisions and repetition, that's all done with loops and conditionals. It's exactly the same as in JavaScript, which is of course the same as in all other C languages. It should feel very familiar. Now, you're not going to have the array for each function available to you here in PHP, but there will be similar things. So when we get to arrays, we'll have to, the for each thing was very specific to JavaScript. We'll have to do that a little bit differently, but we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. And functions, big surprise, same as in JavaScript. You really don't have to do anything different at all. You declare them the same way. You can call them the same way. You handle parameters the same way. So it's very easy to transition from JavaScript into PHP in that sense. About the only thing that's different that you might be able to take advantage of is that you are allowed to specify default values for your parameters. We'll see what that means, and we'll play around with that as we create some functions here. But let's go ahead and put some of this into action. And like I said before, why don't we go ahead and create a table? It involves a lot of repetition. We can put a conditional in it if we want to, and we can give it a function or two to really make it work. So this can be a good way to play with things here at the beginning. Since we're moving into a bigger example here, let's go ahead and start a whole new example. So we're starting from scratch here. We've got the basic page sort of set up. It's been renamed to index.php, and we aren't doing any PHP in it yet, but we're gonna. So it's all ready to do that. Everything should be set up as need be. And let's go ahead right here in the section. We're gonna make our table. To do that, first of all, let's transition over into genuine PHP. So we need to do the whole PHP tag. And I'm going to actually, indentation always gets a little bit tricky in PHP files. I don't like to be out there at whatever level the HTML was, so you'll often see me when I go into a big chunk of PHP, just getting all the way back over to the beginning again. It might feel a little weird to do that, and that's certainly not the only way to do it. Opinions differ here. But because we've got two languages working together, indentation is going to become a bit of a free-for-all sometimes, and that's okay. In here, I'd basically like to generate a table. And we're not going to be able to do this quite the same way we did in JavaScript, where we had full control over the DOM, and we could create DOM elements and mix them all together without writing a single bit of HTML, like we finally did towards the end. Here, we're basically just going to dump a bunch of HTML out and see what it looks like. So we'll echo, and we'll output a table tag with our classes that we know we need. And here you'll see is one place that using those double quotes is useful. Now when I name the classes here, I'm going to use single quotes inside of the PHP. You'll notice out here I tend to use double quotes everywhere. That was on purpose because it plays nice with JavaScript. But you can use single quotes as well. Most of the web technologies allow you to interchange the two. So I'm going to use that here. And the classes I want to do are, of course, table and table striped, my usual ones that I work with. And then we'll close that off. Now, we're going to be splitting this onto multiple lines, and I'm just going to go ahead and deliberately do that and still be echoing out the table later on here. This is going to look kind of ugly, and it might feel frustrating at first, but I'll show you there's ways that we can start to sort of clean that up later on. For now, I'm just going to do a whole bunch of echo statements. And so let's keep going with this. We then would need to echo out a t-head, which would also happen here. And we would need to echo out a tr, and so on and so forth in this sort of manner, little by little building up the table the same way it was built up previously in HTML. Now I've also gone ahead and thrown in the t-body tag, and here we have a row and our cells that are in that. So we've got letters across the heading, and we've got numbers across the row of the body. And so that we can then save all of this and generate an error. I know what's happened here. Let's look at the console though, just so that we can see exactly what it didn't like. We go over to the console, we can see parsing error at line 24, expected comma or semicolon. So once again, semicolons are not as free to be left out in PHP as they are in JavaScript. I'm going to go ahead and put those back in here and save that. And again, because I generated a 500 error, it's not going to auto-sync. I got to refresh manually. There it is. Now we've got our table. So this is ugly. This happens a lot when you are working in the world of PHP, and we'd really like to avoid it. For that, when you have big blocks of text like this that you'd like to just sort of output directly, you can do that. There is some special syntax available that allows you to specify multi-line strings in a much more reasonable way. The name for these is called HereDoc and NowDoc, all one word, HEREDOC and NOWDOC. And the two of them are basically exactly the same way the single quotes and the double quotes work when you're creating strings. If you use, let's see, make sure I remember which is which. If you use the HereDoc syntax, that's just like the double quotes, and it will actually interpret any variables that are between them and put their values instead. If you use NowDoc syntax, you're going to get the single quote version. Basically, it will print literally what you put there and not try and interpret variables. Let's see what this looks like. You're basically going to type 3 less than characters, and then you need to type some sort of tag. Very often we do EOF, which is for end of file. And that is a single line. And so this basically says, here is beginning this is actually a HereDoc block. And I would then put whatever text I want, and then I would do EOF after that to say that it ends. Everything that appears between these will be interpreted as a large block of text. So I'm going to go ahead and grab all of this out of here, and I'm going to go through it and do some find replace action to get it down to just a block of text now. So everywhere we have echo and quote, I want to remove that. So we'll say replace all. And then everywhere I have quote with a semicolon, I want to remove that as well. So I say replace all. And so now this starts looking much more reasonable. We can even indent it properly. You'll find Atom is very amenable to this syntax. It likes it a lot better, and it highlights it a lot better too. And so you can see here, it's still not perfect. It still doesn't quite sense it the way it should, but it gets the job done. So now, basically, everything from here to here is going to be encoded as a string. I can then do whatever I want to it. I can, in fact, store it. I could call it $tablestring equals that, and then I've basically assigned it to a variable, and I could echo out that variable. I could say echo $tablestring, like that. And if I do that, I cause an error. Let's see what I did. What did I do wrong here? Parse error at line 22. It doesn't like line 22. Why doesn't it like that? All right, well, it turns out I had 2 errors that were kind of working against each other. First of all, I had a semicolon up here, and I shouldn't have. And that's actually what made all of this look nice. Unfortunately, it doesn't look nice, and I thought that it did. But in any case, you cannot have a semicolon at the end of your start of the HereDoc. In addition, you have to have one at the end, so I had that swapped. So when you start your HereDoc declaration, it should look like this. Triple arrow and then a tag name. And this can be anything you want. I just use EOF for end of file. This is a fairly common thing. And then down here, when you truly want it to end, it has to be a single line with that tag on it and then a semicolon at the end of it. And note, you have to be careful here. This cannot be indented at all. It needs to be exactly that one single line that you declared up here. And then I can assign that to a variable and echo that variable. And you can see over here, it does exactly what it did before. And I could change these things around. And you'll see that it actually does change over there. So this is a much better way to get a big chunk of text out there. This is something I highly encourage when you're dealing with a big, large block of just output that you need to create. Don't create a whole bunch of echoes. Instead, use this sort of HereDoc format. Now, in this situation, it will interpret variables. So let's create a variable here. We could create a variable, we'll call it headings, and we'll give it all the column headings in here. I'm breaking my own rule. These should be double quotes. It really doesn't matter for something this simple, so let's stick with single quotes. C and D. And then let's use them in the middle of this. So I can come down here and say, I'm going to shorten this actually. Let's just call it head so that it isn't so long. $head 0, $head 1, and so on and so forth. And so as long as I'm doing HereDoc syntax, which is what we are, this should, oops, I meant 3. This should interpret those, and it does. And I can make them something different. AA, BB, CC, DD. And it is actually interpreting those variables. Now the alternative is now-doc syntax, and this is basically exactly the same as here-doc, only it treats things the way single quotes would be treated. All you have to do is put the tag in single quotes. And when you do that, you're now in that single quote form, and it will literally print what you give it. So you can see here, it now goes through and does $head0, $head1, and so on and so forth, instead of actually interpreting those as variables, just like the difference between single quotes and double quotes. Now, of course, I don't have to store this in a variable. It may not be obvious to some folks, but I could just immediately output it if I wanted. It's just a string. So I could say echo triple less than up to EOF, and then have that whole block in there, and that will work exactly the same way. All you're really doing is making a big string here, and you could use it the same way you would use any other string that you might be trying to access. So keep that in mind. You'll see it very often used like this, where you just start an echo off with it and then have this big long block of text. So this is a way to shorten big blocks of text, and it's one that I highly recommend when you're dealing with that. Now, at the same time here, we still do want to do some code. So let's go ahead and cut this off right here. And then right here we have a place where we'd kind of like to output some code instead. I'm going to leave the TR up there actually, but I want to get out of the string here now, and instead let's do a loop. Let's say for integer I equals 0. I did it. There's always something I got to get used to. $i equals 0. $i is less than 4 in this case, and then $i plus plus. I'm setting up a loop here, and inside this loop I want to go through and I want to echo out the values for each of the head. So it's going to look like this. I'm going to echo out t head at $i, right like that. And that will create the row for me. Then let's go right back into our here-doc syntax. I need to close the row, so I'm going to come in here and say /tr to close the row out. And let's put this one out a notch. And then that'll go on down just like it did before. And get our search off of here. So let's save that. And now it's generating this dynamically. It's going through exactly that many. In fact, I could shorten it if I wanted to. That's going to mess up the table a little bit. It's missing one in its header row, but I don't have to go through all 4 of them like that. Now, when we're dealing with arrays, we really don't want to hard code the length like this. I did that initially because, in fact, we can't just do this. This is how we would do it if it was JavaScript or Java or other similar languages. We just do .length on the name of the array. But this doesn't work in PHP. You can see here it basically evaluates to 0, nothing. You don't even get any errors over at the console. You just tried to access something that doesn't exist, and it basically says, no, I can't do that. And it shows you, it gets back 0. So what we need to do instead is we need to use a function. There's a function count. And count goes through and counts how many elements are in the array. And so then we give it the array, $head. So that is, I guess I sort of lied earlier, arrays have one small difference from JavaScript, and that's that you have to use count in order to figure out how many are in there. You can also do size of. That's an alternative that works almost exactly the same, but you'll find most people use count. It just makes sense. Count the head. I'll also caution that this is in fact kind of inefficient. It's going to test that every single loop iteration, and so as it goes through this particular loop, it will run that count function every time. And that count function, just to let you know, is not trivial. It can be better to store the size. So we can say size equals count of head, and then use that variable. Now for our little array right here, this is a paltry savings. We really don't need to worry about it. Oops, semicolon. A refresh. There we go. We really don't need to worry about it, but all the same, if you want to make sure you're being as efficient as possible, this is a better way to do it. So I wanted to make sure and let you know. Feel free to just put count head right in here if you feel better about that. That's probably what I will do, as it's my natural habit. So there we go. Now you see us making some decisions here. And naturally, we can do the same sort of thing right down here. Let's do that. Let's go ahead and stop at the TR, and then we'll get out of here doc, so EOF. And then we would, let's go ahead and restart the here doc right here. So we could say here, echo triple less than EOF. And that'll close out the rest of the table context. But right here, let's do some programmatic things again. Let's actually do, what do we say? Let's actually do multiple rows. So let's not include the TR there. We'll just come down, we've declared the body tag, and now we want to put some things inside of it. So let's say for $i equals 0, we'll start at the beginning. We'll say it equals 1 this time. $i is less than or equal to 10. We'll do 10 rows. Oh, and what am I doing? Let's not call it I. Let's call it $row. I always like to use descriptive variable names whenever I can. So this is rows. Let's call them rows. And then $row plus plus. And then as we go through, we will echo a tr tag. I only need the opening tag for now. We will eventually echo out again the closing tr tag, but in between that, we need to create some data for the row. So now let's do for $call for column equals 0. $call is less than or equal to, oh, and let's start at 1 again. I want to do 1 here. Less than or equal to 1, 2, 3, 4. We want this to actually go out to the size because we can't contradict what we did before. So let's just do size. It has to be the same width as our original row, right? So that's important. And then $call plus plus. Oop, not equals equals, plus plus. There we go. And then let's echo out all of those cells. So we'll do TD. And inside of that, let's do, we can do some nice syntax here, $row, comma, $call. So we'll make it look like a little coordinate. Semicolon at the end of that. Let's save this and see if it worked. I broke it. And you notice I do this often when it comes to the wonderful world of PHP. Let's see what's wrong. Go to the console here. Parse error at line 40. It doesn't like line 40, which starts right here. Oh, I can see why. We didn't put a semicolon at the end of our EOF. Maybe that's all it was. That was it. Good. There we go. And so there we go. Now you can see we're going through and we're slowly printing out all of these different variables. So this is a good way to do it. Now, the last thing I want to demonstrate in here is making a decision. Let's, instead of going out to size here, let's go out to some arbitrary thing like 10. Now I know if I do that, HTML will play along, but it's not happy about it because I've now created rows that aren't equal to what the original header row was. And so this is a totally artificial situation, but let's just work together here and pretend this is something we want to do. We'll say if $col is greater than $size, we don't want to output anything. So we want to only do this strictly if column is less than or equal to size. So I'm going to actually reverse that. If it's less than or equal to size, we'll go ahead and output it. But if it's greater than size, we don't want to output anything. We don't even really need the else here because we just want it to do nothing when that happens. And so let's save that. And there we go. Now you can see, even though I told it to do 10, when it's greater than it, it just skips it. It's just an excuse to show you guys how to write a conditional in there as well. So there we go, a little bit of everything in here. We didn't do any functions, but we'll get to functions eventually down the road. So there we go, a little bit of everything here except for functions. The last thing I want to show you now is how we can write and then call a function. As I mentioned before, it's pretty much exactly like it is in JavaScript. So I'm going to come back up here, and right at the beginning, before we output anything, let's go ahead and start a function right here. And let's see, we'll call this function make table rows. And I want to take the code that I had down here that starts right here, where we go through and output these rows, and I'm going to move it up into that function. There we go. So now all those table rows are gone because it's no longer running. I've moved it into this function up here. What do I do now? Well, I just call it when I want to do it. So down here in the middle of this, I'm going to call make table rows, and it will do that for me. Maybe. Oh, it is doing it for me quite effectively. I forgot to tell it what size is. Size is no longer declared over here in make table rows, is it? Size was only declared up here, so we have to tell it what size is. We need a parameter. Let's go ahead and pass that in. $size will come in here. And so the $sign still needs to be on there. It's a variable. Parameters are variables, just like anything else. So we need to declare it up there. And then down here, I should pass in $size to the function. There we go. Thank heavens. That fixed it. So let's actually go a little bit further here. Let's give it $rows with an S as the first parameter, and then give it $cols with an S as the second parameter. And so we'll have row go out to less than or equal to rows, and col go out to less than or equal to cols with an S. So that way we can control exactly how many rows and columns it makes. And then down here we pass in how many we want it to do. So let's have it do 100, or let's start small, 5 rows, and we still want to do $size for the number of columns because we want that to match. And let's see what we get here now. Oh, I need to take out this code. We're no longer going to restrict by size because that's not important. There we go. So all I did now was just remove the check against size there. And so now it goes across 4 rows, or 4 columns like it should, and it's making 5. Let's make 50. Let's make 5,000. There we go. This is why we like programming languages, because you better believe me, you would not want to create this HTML. Let's see here, can I actually get it to go all the way down to the bottom here? I might be able to. There we go. It's amazing to me that it can output all of that quickly. So there we go. That's all it really takes to call a function. The other thing we might want to do here though, this is the one new feature that you have with functions when you're working inside of PHP, and that's that things can have default values. So let's say, for example, I always want to make sure it sticks to 4 on the number of columns. I can do that. And then I'm allowed to not pass it in if I don't want to. So it will still make 5,000, and you can see it's limiting to 4. If I do give it a value, it will use that value instead. But if I don't give it a value, if I just leave it out, it automatically uses all 4. The one caution I have about default values is that you always have to assign them from right to left. So the rightmost one would need to receive one before the first one could receive one. And so now I could leave out 5,000, and it will use 10 for rows and 4 for columns, just like it should. If I try to only do it on the left one, that's going to create an issue. Basically, while PHP doesn't get mad at you about that, doesn't put out any errors, you've created a weird situation. It doesn't know what to do for either of these. It doesn't have a default value for calls, and if I try to specify one, well, now I've actually specified the number of rows. It doesn't really work. It gets confused. It's just syntactically inappropriate to do that. So always make sure that you specify them from right to left. You have to do that, or you're not going to get the behavior that you expect.